They say faith is supposed to save us. But sometimes faith is just another kind of fire, one that burns silently, behind closed doors, inside the minds of men who mistake devotion for power. Take a slow breath with me, in and out. Now picture a Sunday morning in Pernambuco, 1859. The sky is white with heat. The sugarcane fields stretch all the way to the horizon like a green ocean, glimmering under the sun. The bells of a Igreja de São Domingos are ringing, their echoes sliding to the narrow streets of a colonial town built on the bones of slaves. The smell of salt drifts from the Atlantic, mixing with the sweet, almost nauseating scent of molasses. And somewhere inside that church, incense curls in the air like smoke from invisible fire. The pews are filled, men in starched linen, gold rings flashing on their hands. The women wear lace veils, rosaries heavy with imported silver. And in the front row sit 12 colonels, the most powerful men of the region, sugar barons, slave traders, landowners who built their wealth on blood and prayer. Their boots shine, their eyes do not. Behind the altar, the priest raises his hands. His name is Father Joaquim Alvarez, though few say it out loud anymore. History remembers him only in whispers. They call him the Serpent of the Cross. He wasn't like the others. He didn't shout sermons about submission or preach patience to the enslaved. He was quiet, too quiet, and there was something in his gaze that unsettled even the most faithful. Something that looked less like holiness and more like a secret. Take another breath. Can you hear it? The low hum of fans swatting the heat, the rustle of fabric, the faint sobs of the enslaved women who were forced to attend the mass, standing at the back, heads bowed, hands rough from the cane. Outside, the sun beats mercilessly on the earth. Inside, the air grows heavy. No one knows yet that death has already entered the church. The priest's voice trembles through the nave, deep and deliberate, dominus vobiscum. And they answer, Et cum spiritu, the rhythm of ritual, practiced 1,000 times before. But today, every syllable feels sharper. As he lifts the chalice, the golden cup catches the light. What no one sees, what no one ever suspects, is the faint swirl at its base, a shadow that wasn't there before, a shimmer that doesn't belong to wine. Some say the poison came from a plant used by healers, brought secretly from the Quilambos, those hidden villages of escaped slaves in the forest. Others swear it was mercury, stolen from a plantation doctor. But whatever it was enough to silence 12 men before the next sunrise. Breathe. Now imagine this. The priest's hands are steady as he lowers the chalice back onto the altar. He looks at the colonels. One by one, he doesn't blink. He knows what they've done. The beatings, the whippings, the children torn from mothers, sold to distant lands. He's seen it all from the confessional, heard their sins whisper like confessions to God, but God never answered. So tonight, justice will. The mass continues. Latin murmurs, candles flicker, a child coughs, the organ groans. Somewhere, a woman drops a rosary. It echoes like a warning. By the time the bread is broken, sweat drips from the priest's temples. By the time the wine is served, his eyes are glassy with something that isn't guilt. Each colonel drinks in turn. They cross themselves. They whisper amen, and the poison begins its slow work beneath their ribs. No one notices. Not yet, because faith has a way of disguising fear. And in this church, fear has always been the first commandment. As the choir begins to sing, Father Joaquim lowers his gaze, his lips moving in silence, for the blood of the innocent. Outside, thunder rolls over the cane fields. The storm is coming, and this time it isn't heaven's wrath. It's human, it's deliberate, it's divine in its own dark way. Take another breath. In and out, the sound of rain begins outside, soft at first, like fingertips tapping on the tiled roof. Inside the church, the choir's song rises, sweet and trembling, the Latin words curling to the air like smoke. No one knows yet. The poison works slowly, like faith itself. It begins quietly, invisible, asking only for patience. The first to falter is Colonel Vieira, the oldest among them, a man who built half the sugar mills in Pernambuco. His hands once signed the sale of hundreds of lives. Now those same hands tremble as he reaches for his chest. He thinks it's the heat, the suffocating humidity pressing down on the pews. But the heat he feels is not from the sun, it's from within, a fire blooming in his veins. He wipes his forehead, nods at the man beside him, and forces a smile. The choir continues. Agnus Dei, Catalis Peccata Mundi, Lamb of God, who takes away the sins of the world. Another colonel coughs. Then another. The sound spreads like ripples in still water. Cough, cough, silence. Cough again. The air thickens. Father Joachim doesn't move. He stands behind the altar, eyes lowered, fingers tracing the edge of the chalice. To the crowd, it looks like prayer, but to him, it's something else entirely. It's the counting of heartbeats. 1, 2, 3. He knows the rhythm by now. The time it takes for sin to meet its consequence. A boy holding the incense looks up at him, wide-eyed. The priest nods gently, as if to say, continue. The boy swings the thurible. The smoke dances golden and heavy, hiding the first man to fall. When the body hits the floor, it sounds like thunder inside stone. Someone gasps. Someone screams. And then, like dominoes collapsing one by one, the 12 begin to shake. The pews creak. Women clutch their rosaries. The organ halts mid-note. The priest raises his hands. Stay calm, he says. His voice is soft, but it carries through the chaos. This is the will of God. And that sentence seals his fate. The soldiers at the back of the church rush forward. The servants try to flee, but the heavy doors are closed. The storm outside beats against them, trapping everyone inside a cage of thunder and fear. The colonels lie scattered like fallen idols at the foot of the altar. Some convulse, some whisper prayers, some call for mercy. And Father Joachim just stands there, unmoving, his white robes glowing faintly in the candlelight. He doesn't look triumphant. He looks ancient, as if he's been carrying this moment for lifetimes. Do you think God doesn't see? He whispers, not to them, but to himself. Do you think he blesses cruelty dressed in gold? No one answers. How could they? Their throats are closing. Their blood is turning black beneath their skin. Outside, lightning flashes. For a moment, the entire church glows. And in that brief light, everyone sees what they were never supposed to. The priest standing before 12 dying men, his shadow stretching across the altar, his eyes shining with tears and fire. When the storm finally breaks, the doors burst open, and the rain pours in, washing over the floor, mixing with spilled wine, turning it the color of blood. People run into the streets, shouting, crying, praying. They call it a curse, a miracle, a massacre. No one agrees on what they saw, but by nightfall, word spreads faster than lightning. 12 colonels dead during Mass. A priest vanished into the storm. The governor sends soldiers. The church is sealed. The chalice is taken as evidence. And the body of Father Joachim is nowhere to be found. Days pass. The funerals are held behind closed doors. No bells are rung. The church declares a tragedy a divine mystery. But whispers tell another story. They say the priest didn't flee. They say he walked barefoot into the mangroves, carrying only his Bible and a small vial. That he was seen near the river, baptizing the mud with ashes. That he said, if God won't cleanse this land, I will. Pause here. Let the silence settle. Feel the weight of that idea. A man of God deciding that vengeance is holier than forgiveness. What does it take for faith to turn that far? For mercy to rot into fury? Because Father Joachim wasn't born a monster. He was born like anyone else. A boy who believed. He grew up seeing the sugar fields as paradise. He was told the church stood between man and evil. But as he grew older, he realized evil didn't live in shadows. It lived in daylight, wearing robes, sitting in pews, holding the hands of the powerful. He heard confession after confession, men bragging about sins they never intended to repent. He saw the enslaved forced to build chapels with the same hands that picked cane until they bled. He saw men kneel before the cross after whipping a child. And one day, something in him broke. Some say the poison came from a woman, an enslaved healer whose son had been killed by one of the colonels. That she came to him in secret and said, "If you won't speak, then act. If you won't curse them, then let your mass do it for you." Maybe that's true, maybe it's not, but history doesn't care for certainty. It only remembers the fire. Now imagine the church weeks later, empty, cold. The chalice sits on the altar, its gold dull by soot. No one dares touch it. They say it's cursed. But in the villages beyond plantations, people whisper something different. They call the priest O Santo do Veneno, the saint of poison, not as an insult, but as reverence, because for them his act wasn't murder. It was deliverance. They say rain fell for 7 days straight after that mass, that the rivers overflowed and carried away the blood of the sugar mills, that for a brief moment the air smelled clean. Take a breath again, in and out, because this story isn't about poison. It's about what happens when silence becomes unbearable, when prayer is no longer enough, when the man meant to bless becomes a hand that strikes. Dawn drags his feet across Recife like a reluctant witness. The storm is gone, but the streets are still slick, and the church stones sweat with the night's heat. Soldiers stand at the door with muskets crossed. No one enters, no one leaves. Inside, wax puddles harden around fallen candles. Incense lingers, sweet, stubborn, cloying, as if holiness itself is trying to cover the sourness of fear. Listen, hear the scrape of boots. The governor's men examine pews with gloved hands, whisper Latin words they do not understand. A clerk dips his pen and begins to turn a miracle into numbers. 12 bodies, 9 nobles, 3 militia colonels. 2 hours, 40 minutes after the first cough. Cause of death? The page waits for an answer that will keep the city calm. The bishop arrives last. His ring catches the light like a blade. He does not look at the bodies. He looks at the chalice. "Seal it," he says. You can feel the temperature drop, as if truth itself is being pushed into a small, airtight box. They interrogate altar boys, sacristans, the old woman who polishes the candlesticks. Did the wine taste strange? Who touched the cruets? Who set the table of the Lord? But the boys only cry. The woman trembles. The sacristan repeats the same sentence until it turns to stone. The mass was like all the others, until it wasn't. Outside, the city hums with theories. Some say French poison. Some say African curse. Some whisper the word justice and cross themselves as if it's a sin. Let your chest tighten with the weight of what happens next, because institutions do what institutions do. They protect themselves first. A council is formed, governor, bishop, 2 judges, a man from the port who knows how to make problems vanish at sea. They meet in a cool room. Shutters close. Some are struggling at the window like a trapped bird. "What do we call this?" one judge asks. "An accident." Another answers, too quickly. The bishop clears his throat. "The people want a name," he says. "If they do not receive one, they will find one themselves." So they try on names like Coates, a foreign agitator, a slave revolt in disguise, a desecration by heretics who hate the church. Each story is weighed not for truth, but for usefulness. Which rumor will burn slowest? Which lie can be made to sound like order? Meanwhile, the city keeps watch. Funerals without bells, widows behind veils, dark suits and darker carriages. And in the back alleys where the law forgets to look, candles, small flames left on thresholds as if the mark which houses believe the mass had finally done what it promised, judge the living and the dead. Breathe. Days become weeks. Soldiers search the mangroves, the sugar paths, the ruined hermitages along the river. They find footprints. They find a white stole tangled in roots. They find a Bible with swollen pages where rain has tried to drink the words, but not the priest. Or that is the official version, because rumors always is braver than paper. Some say a fisherman saw a man in cleric black wading through the flood at night, lantern low, eyes level to the horizon like someone walking to keep a promise. Some say a band of Colombians, escaped enslaved people, sheltered him for 7 nights, fed him cassava in silence, then sent him inland with a drumbeat that meant go now. Others insist he never left the church at all, He simply evaporated, like the faith of the men he buried. And then there is the notebook. It appears 3 weeks after the funerals, found beneath the sacristy floorboards, tucked in an oilcloth. Not a confession, not a manifesto, just a string of entries, ordinary as bread, until they aren't. The handwriting is neat, almost shy. He writes about humidity cracking the altar paint, about a boy who sings off-key and tries so hard it breaks his heart, about a woman who leaves fruit at the door of the chapel before dawn and whispers an old name for God. Then the ink darkens. Today a colonel confessed nothing and demanded blessing. He laughed when I asked about the child taken to mill. He called grief an inconvenience. How do I absolve a man who has never felt the weight of his own hands? Another page. If mercy is medicine, why does it taste like sugar for those with power and ash for those without? Lord, do you hear them at night? Do you hear the chains in your house? And then the sentence that will never make it into the archive. If the table is holy, then let it be honest. Let feed the hungry and starve the wolves. Stop. Let that throb in your throat. Because in that line, the priest is not plotting. He is breaking. The bishop reads the notebook alone. He keeps his face calm, but his hand shakes, just once, where the quill rests. He wraps the pages in cloth again and places them in a drawer that locks with a click you can feel in your teeth. The council decides. A statement is drafted. An unfortunate contamination from imported wine. The tragic act of God. The printer sets the type. The paper smells of oil and tin. By evening, the city reads a decision delivered from on high, and the word poison is replaced with providence. But memory refuses to learn new vocabulary. In markets, women braid the story into hair. On docks, men sing it into rope. In slave quarters beyond the city, the tale takes root as medicine, a mask that turned against the masters, a chalice that knew the taste of blood before it was poured, a priest who didn't ask God for permission. He asked grief for instruction. You can see why the church is afraid of this version, because it does not center their power. It centers pain, and pain tells better stories. At the same time, there are those who curse the priest's name. Planters spit on the ground when he's mentioned. One judge calls him a viper investments. A pamphlet circulates. Beware the red wine of false shepherds, as if the lesson to learn is about goblets, not graves. We move forward. Months pass. The cane grows back, because cane always grows back. The mills return to their rhythm. Crush, boil, pour, whip, pray. Ships take on their cargo of sweetness and sorrow. Life resumes, as it always does, by pretending nothing happened. But the city is different in ways that only the night can count. Women begin to leave small cups of water at church steps on Sundays. For the thirsty, they say, a new prayer appears in the mouths of the poor. Blessed be the table that feeds the just. Cursed be the table that fattens the cruel. It is not in any catechism. It doesn't need to be. One afternoon, a young seminarian sneaks into the bishop's study and opens a locked drawer. He reads the notebook in a shaft of dust-lit sun. By the time he reaches the last page, he is crying and doesn't know when he started. He copies one sentence and hides it inside his sleeve like a relic. If salvation is real, it must begin with the hands of the harmed. Years from now, he will preach that line in a village with no name, and no one will ask where it came from. They'll just nod, because the body recognizes truth faster than the brain. Breathe. Let your skin remember what your mind wants to tidy away. That the Mass ended, but the sermon continued, and still no priest. He becomes a template you can trace onto any silhouette. In one story, he becomes a healer in Sateo, traveling with a mule and a wooden cross, giving bitter teas to men who have only ever tasted sweet. In another, he joins a Colombo deeper than maps, teaching children to read the sky while elders teach him how to hear drums as prayer. In a darker version, the one planters tell to their sons by firelight, he becomes a specter who walks sugar fields at night and turns wine to vinegar with a touch. Which one is true? Maybe the wrong question. The better question, which one do you need to be true? Because that is how legends work. They don't lie, they assemble. Now, step with me into an archive a century later. Air cold as a chapel in winter. A historian in gloves opens a box that hasn't been touched in decades. A chalice, dulled, a ledger brittle, and at the bottom, the notebook, edges scarred, ink brown as dry blood. She reads. She doesn't gasp. She doesn't shout. She just closes her eyes and sits very still, as if a long, stubborn door inside the past is finally open a crack. In the article she will write, there will be footnotes, page numbers, careful words like suggests, perhaps, likely, and that is good work. But somewhere beyond the journal, beyond the peer review, candles will be lit again on a Sunday night, and no one will read her article, and the truth will still be true, because the city remembers better when it is dark. So what do we do with that? With a priest who turns sacrament into sentence? With a church that called poison providence? With a people who decided memory was safer than permission? Hold that tension in your chest. Do not rush to resolve it. Not yet, because the last part of this story isn't about punishment. It's about inheritance. What lives on after the thunder fades? What burns quietly after the flames are gone? Close your eyes a moment. Hear the scrape of a match. Feel the heat of a small, stubborn flame cupped in two hands, yours. Take a slow breath with me. In and out. The story of Father Joaquim Alvarez didn't end in that church. It ended everywhere silence still pretends to be holy. Everywhere power still calls itself divine. Everywhere people still bow to the weight of tradition, even when that tradition reeks of blood. Because the truth is, history does not bury its ghosts. It just gives them new uniforms. You can still feel his story in the architecture of the world. In cathedrals gilded with stolen gold. In hymns sung by lips that have forgotten what they're singing. In prayers that sound like apologies whispered to power. Centuries later, the question remains, what happens when faith stops listening to the living? Listen, do you hear it? The faint hum beneath the noise of cities, beneath traffic, beneath sermons broadcast through microphones and marble walls. That sound isn't electricity. It's memory. It's the echo of those 12 men choking on their sins. It's the murmur of the priest whispering a promise no one wanted to understand. If the table of God becomes a feast for cruelty, then even heaven must taste its own justice. Now imagine standing in that same church today. The pews are polished, the paintings restored. Tourists walk through, taking photos, smiling politely at the stained glass that tells only half the story. They don't see the marks on the floor, faint burns where candle wax mixed with blood. They don't smell the ghost of smoke that clings to the stones. But if you stand long enough, if you breathe deeply enough, you'll feel it, the air that trembles as if remembering what it was forced to forget. And maybe that's what makes this story dangerous, because it refuses to stay buried, because it reminds us that holiness without justice is just theater. Take a moment to imagine the priest one last time, not as a killer, not as a saint, but as a man caught between mercy and rage, between the confessional and the gallows, between silence and the scream that history would rather not hear. He believed in God, yes, but he also believed that some sins demanded fire instead of forgiveness, that some altars must burn before they can bless again. Let that idea sit with you, not as approval, but as warning, because vengeance is seductive when wrapped in righteousness, because the line between justice and despair is as thin as the gold rim of that chalice. But here's the truth history never prints. Sometimes the most dangerous thing a man of faith can do is finally tell the truth. After the massive death, as the people came to call it, Brazil trembled quietly. Slaves whispered the priest's name at night like a prayer. Colonels built new chapels to wash away their fear. And in the documents of empire, one sentence tried to erase it all. The events of that Sunday shall not be discussed again. But the more they erased, the clearer the outline became. The more they silenced, the louder the silence rang. Centuries later, when historians uncover the archives, the same question echoed across the pages. Was he evil, or was he just the first man in a holy robe to stop pretending? Let the question breathe, because it isn't about him anymore. It's about us. How many times have we watched injustice dressed as tradition? How many times have we excused cruelty because it came with incense and ceremony? How many times did we let others die while we whispered, "Forgive them," and looked away? Father Joaquim's act was terrible, yes, but it was also a mirror, a reflection of what happens when compassion is weaponized against the oppressed, when forgiveness is demanded only from the wounded, never from the hand that caused the wound. So ask yourself, what would you have done? Would you have stopped him? Would you have condemned him? Or would you have watched the wine pass from his hands to theirs and felt something dark but undeniable stir inside you? The wish that, for once, the world might finally feel what it had done? Take another breath. In and out. The night after the poisonings, the rain washed through the streets of Recife, carrying ash and blood and rumor into the sea. And from that sea, new stories were born. Fishermen said the waves glowed red when the moon was full, that prayers whispered on the water returned as whispers from beneath, that a figure in priestly robes was sometimes seen walking on the sand, head bowed, hands empty. Maybe that's myth. Maybe it's memory. Maybe it's both. Because myth is just memory wearing a disguise. Generations later, the people of Pernambuco would tell children, if you see a candle flicker in a church where no wind blows, that's the priest asking if you still remember why the fire began. Let that image burn behind your eyelids. A single candle, glowing in a church full of shadows. A light that shouldn't exist, and yet there it is. Defiant, persistent, refusing to go out. That's what this story is. Not just an act of vengeance. Not just the fall of 12 men, but a small, stubborn light, refusing to be snuffed out by empire or church or fear. Because history belongs not to those who win, but to those who refuse to forget. Now, bring it closer to the present. Every era has its altars, its poisons, its priests. We still see them, not in cassocks maybe, but in suits, in offices, in pulpits, in uniforms. Still blessing inequality, still sipping wine while others choke on dust. And every time they say, "This is the will of God," a voice echoes from 1859, quiet but unbroken. No, this is the will of man. So what do we do with that knowledge? We carry it carefully, like a chalice too full. We remember that truth is dangerous, but silence is worse. We remember that justice, when denied, becomes its own prayer. And we remember that somewhere, beneath all the noise, a single sentence still hums like a heartbeat. If you can't cleanse the altar with mercy, cleanse it with truth. Take one last breath with me. In and out. Now listen again to the wind that moves through the old churches, to the faint sound of bells that ring even when no one pulls a rope. That isn't ghosts. That's history calling you to pay attention. Because the story of Father Joaquim isn't about poison. It's about what happens when faith meets conscience and refuses to look away. So when the screen fades, don't let the story end here. Carry it, share it, whisper it, because silence was the master's weapon. And memory is ours. And if anyone ever asks you, why tell a story so dark, so cruel, so forgotten, tell them this. Because some prayers were answered in fire, and the world pretended not to see.